Do you like Art Deco inspired clay pieces? Do you like to use image transfer for your clay designs? Well, if it is so, I invite you to watch this tutorial and get inspired to create more using polymer clay. Hi, I'm Michaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and let's dive into the tutorial. I'm working with white polymer clay that I have previously conditioned, and then I passed the clay through the setting number 3 of my Atlas past machine. I've prepared a laser printed image, and I've used scissors to cut it out, and then I applied a generous amount of rubbing alcohol on top of my clay piece, and then I put the paper on top, and as you can see, because I put a lot of rubbing alcohol, the paper is soaked wet. So I'm taking the time to burnish the image into the clay, and I'm rubbing the paper with my fingers, and I'm insisting a lot, and this is a very important part of the image transfer process. And sometimes I might be able to lift off the paper, but because I put a generous amount of rubbing alcohol, I will just have to remove the paper fibers, and I am also going to use water to remove some of the paper fibers as well. So I recommend you to have a bowl of water near to remove the remaining paper fibers. And then you'll just have to let a little bit the clay sit for 3-4 minutes, and then you'll notice if you have more paper fibers, and you'll just have to use again a little bit of water and remove the paper fibers. And then I decided to use a metal cutter with an interesting shape, and I'm cutting out a design, and in fact I'm interested in capturing the woman figure face. When using cutters, you have to take the time and smooth off the edges. And normally I like to make my clay pieces in one sitting, meaning I'm making the back and the front in the same time, and I'm making my piece only once. But for this intricate design, I'm going to make the front pieces first. I'm going to bake them for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to use liquid clay to make the beautiful back. And of course, when using cutters, you have to take the time and smooth off the edges. So again, if you notice paper fibers on top of your image transfer, you just have to use water and remove them. And then next to the second piece of polymer clay, I've just put some imitation gold metal leaf on top, and then I used my fingers to burnish it into the clay, gently of course. And then you just have to save the scraps, the imitation gold metal scraps, for other projects. And I'm going to use a cutter with a leafy pattern, and I intend to cut out 3 such elements, and I'm going to use them to make like a beautiful tiara for our polymer clay Art Deco inspired goddess. And I am going to use a larger element for the central part of the tiara, and 2 elements on the left and on the right, but I'm going to remove parts of the cutout design because I thought the element was a little bit too big, and I had to adjust a little bit the size. So I'm putting everything together to have an idea of how it is going to look. And then I'm going to assemble these pieces on top of the tile onto which I intend to bake these pieces for 20 minutes. And I pressed them gently together, but even if they do not stick together, this is not very important at this moment, because in fact after baking these pieces for 20 minutes I am going to use more clay, textured clay, to make the back of the piece, and I'm going to assemble these pieces again on top of that raw polymer clay. And I thought this would be the easiest way for this piece with such intricate and cut out designs and sharp elements to use a classical way of making polymer clay beads. So I put more white clay through the pasta machine on top of leaf texture, silicone texture, and I'm flipping the textured clay, and this is going to be the back of the piece. And because I'm attaching baked polymer clay to raw polymer clay, of course I'm using liquid clay, so I put some liquid clay on top of the baked element after letting the clay cool down, of course. And then I did the same for the other elements that I intend to assemble on top of the textured back. And you should not put too much liquid clay, because when using your craft knife to remove the excess clay, if you have too much liquid clay, the pieces will move left and right, and it is very difficult to get a good covering of the back. But I'll show you what to do if this happens as well. So I'm using my left thumbnail to keep these elements in place while cutting around the pieces with my craft knife. And again, you have to use your tools and smooth off the edges. Of course, you have to check if you have more scrap clay to remove. And then I'm going to put this scrap clay together with the scrap clay remaining from cutting out the metal leaf decorated elements, and I am going to put everything through the pasta machine on the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. And I'm going to use this sheet of polymer clay to cut out more elements that I'm going to decorate again with imitation metal leaf, and I'm going to use them to attach a metal element and turn this piece into a beautiful pendant. So I flipped the polymer clay piece, and I'm checking the back of the piece, and I'm noticing that in some areas the back is not fully covered, so I'm pulling on the clay to cover those areas as well. And this happened because the clay piece is slightly moved while I would cut out the excess. And again, I'm decorating the clay with imitation gold metal leaf, and I'm going to use the same cutter to cut out two elements. So I intend to sandwich a beautiful metal connector, metal element with a faux hammered look in between sheets of polymer clay. And in fact I have the back decorated with textured raw polymer clay, and I am going to put the metal element on top, and then use a cutout leafy element decorated with imitation gold metal leaf to sandwich the element in between the clay. And then I would put the gold element on top and the second element as well. And of course you'll have to use parchment paper to press everything together very gently. And I'm making sure that I did not distort too much the design, and I'm pressing the clay into the base in the same time. If you notice white areas which are not decorated with imitation gold metal leaf, you can use scrap metal leaf and put them in those areas. And when you're happy with the look of the piece, you can put it in the oven again for 40 minutes. I bake my pieces on parchment paper. I tent them with an aluminum disposable pan to protect them from direct heat. And then you'll just have to let the clay piece cool down. And you are ready for the next step of the process, which is going to be using solar gold mica powder to color the margins of the piece. I thought this would enhance the look of the piece, and I decided to do this step because I've noticed some white clay showing up in between the goddess tiara and the head of the woman figure. And in the same time, I'm going to use a mixture of varnish and mica powder to color the margins. And in case you notice gap on the metal leaf elements, you can use this mixture of varnish and the mica powder to color those areas as well. If you don't want this colored effect on the back, you can use baby wipes and remove this mixture of mica powder and varnish from the back. Or if you did not notice on the moment, you can sand these areas later with water and sanding paper. And I also felt there was not enough contrast on this image transfer, so I decided to mix a little bit of varnish with black mica powder and enhance the look of the hair and the contrast between the black hair and the face of the woman. Normally, when I work with image transfer, I like to use mica powders in different colors to accentuate the image after the image transfer. And if I'm doing so while the clay is raw, I will just have to use the brush and apply mica powder in those areas. But if I decide to do so after baking the piece, I would mix varnish with mica powder to color certain areas of the image transfer. And then again, you have to let the varnish mixed with mica powder dry, and you are ready for the next step of the process, which is in fact the last step of the process. So I decided to use UV resin to enhance the look of the piece, and I thought this would make the woman figure image transfer pop up even more. And I'm putting a metal cutter under the piece because I want to raise it from my working table, because I know there might be resin drippings and I don't want them to collect on the back. And when I have pieces with so many cutout elements and irregular shapes, I prefer to put something underneath my clay pieces when I put resin on top. But of course I'm not using my best metal cutters, because in case of drippings, I don't want to damage my best cutters. And I'm doing so because I don't want to have resin collecting on the back. And in case you notice resin drippings on the sides, on the back, after curing the resin, you can still take them out using your hands or your craft knife immediately after curing the resin, if you did not wipe them off with baby wipes. And this this adds more depth to this part of the design, and in the same time protects the metal leaf. And as you remember, we also have metal leaf decorated elements on the back, and I recommend you to use UV resin or varnish to protect those elements. And as always, when using UV resin, it is recommended to use a heat gun and remove any air bubbles, and then you can cure the resin for 2 consecutive minutes. And so this is the look of the piece after curing the resin. And I hope that you like this project, and I hope that you like this idea, and I encourage you to take this inspiration and use it in your work with polymer clay. Thank you, and stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay.